Black, and you're not right. I prefer African American, and actually, you're European American.
Wait, what? Oh, I get it. We're both American because we were born here. But our ancestors, yours African and mine's European. That makes sense to me.
Dr. King is saying African Americans of his time having to respond with protests.
Oh, yeah, Blake keeps seeing on Instagram.
Right, something has to be done.
In any campaign, there are 4 basic steps. What's the first step?
Collection of the facts to see if injustices are alive.
Yes, and the second step?
Negotiation.
Yes, and the third basic step in any nonviolent campaign?
Education on the idea of nonviolence.
Right, and number 4?
Direct action.
We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no benefit in admitting the fact that racial injustice is all over this community. Birmingham is probably the most segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of this country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in this nation. These are hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of them, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the political leaders, but they constantly refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the business community. In these negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the store owners, such as their promise to remove humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, we agreed to stop any type of protest. As the weeks and months went on, we realized we are the victims of a broken promise. Yet again, we are confronted with the blasted hopes and the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled on us. So we have no other option except to prepare for direct action. We show up to the protest to bring attention to our struggle before the local and national community. We know the difficulties involved. So we decided to go through a process of education on how to protest without violence. At these workshops on nonviolence, we repeatedly ask ourselves the question, are you able to accept the blows without fighting back?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Shh.
Are you ready to go to jail for this?
Yes, sir. Absolutely not.
For real.
Boy, bye.
And so forth. Isn't negotiation a better path?
Negotiation. This is the purpose of protest. Nonviolent protest seeks to create a crisis in tension so that the community is forced to confront the issue. It may sound shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have worked and preached against violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. We must see the need of having nonviolent, good trouble create the kind of tension in the society that will help people rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic understanding and brotherhood.
So the purpose of these protests is to create a situation so crisis packed that it will open the door to negotiation. We agreed to call for negotiation. One of the basic points in their statement is that our protests aren't necessary. My friends, I say to you, we have not made a single gain in civil rights history without determined, legal, and nonviolent pressure. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. We know through painful experience that freedom is never freely given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Honestly, I have never engaged in a protest that was convenient for those who have not had to suffer from the disease of segregation.
I like him.
Me too.
For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has relieved the emotional stress for a moment, only to cause more frustration. We must come to see that justice, delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence. We still creep at horse and buggy pace just to have a cup of coffee at lunch counter.
I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation and say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you have seen the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering, as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on the television, and see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to the colored children, and see depressing clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son asking in agonizing pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are. And your last name becomes John, and when your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of society of injustice where they experience the blankness of corroding despair.
I hope, sirs, you can understand our unavoidable impatience.
I agree. I have a great deal of anxiety over their willingness to break laws.
The answer is found in the fact that there are 2 types of laws. Oops. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing the segregation in the public schools, I find it rather strange and conflicting we choose to break this law.
How can they advocate breaking some laws and obeying others?
The answer is found in the fact that there are 2 types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the 2? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is against the law of God. Any law that uplifts human dignity is just. Any law that degrades human dignity is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the human dignity. Segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically inappropriate, but it is morally wrong and sinful. Who can say that the officials of Alabama who set up the segregation laws were fairly elected? Throughout the state of Alabama, all types of sneaky methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties without a single Negro registered to vote, despite the fact that Negroes make up half of the population. Can any law set up like this be considered fair? These are just a few examples of unjust laws and just laws.
I don't know if I ever get to use hearing that.
Hearing what?
Negro.
There are some instances when a law is just on its face and unjust where it counts. For instance, I was arrested Friday on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong with a law that says you need a permit for a parade. But when the law is used to support segregation and to deny citizens their First Amendment right of peaceful assembly and peaceful protest, then it becomes unjust. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was seen in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar, because God's law was involved. It was practiced by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the threat of chopping block before giving in to unjust laws of the Roman Empire.
We can never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to help and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. But I'm sure that if I lived in Germany during that time, I would have helped and comforted my Jewish brothers, even though it was illegal.
First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been deeply disappointed with the white Christian. I have almost reached the sad conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the work towards freedom is the white observer, who is more focused on order than on justice, who denies a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with your goal, but I cannot agree with your methods of protest, who tries to impose the timetable for another man's freedom, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more confusing than outright rejection.
But your actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they encourage violence.
Can you really say that? Isn't this like blaming the robbed man because having money means that you should be robbed? Isn't this like blaming Jesus for his crucifixion because he was the loving Son of God? Federal courts have pointed out that it is wrong to tell someone not to pursue his basic constitutional rights because it would lead to violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber.
I had also hoped that the white Christian would stop getting in the way. I received a letter this morning from a white brother in Texas.
All Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but is it possible that you are too great of a religious hurry? It is taking Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth.
Is this man crazy? You know, I think he's crazy. He wants us to wait 2,000 years?
If he worked with God instead of against him, it could be done right now.
All that is said here grows out of tragic misuse of time. It is a silly idea that giving it more time will fix the situation. Actually, time is neutral. It can be used to either build up or tear down. We will have to repent in this generation, not only for the hurtful words and actions of the bad people, but for the gross silence of the good people. We must come to see that the human progress never rolls in on wheels of chance. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of people willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time becomes a partner of the forces of social stagnation.
But King's activity in Birmingham has been so extreme.
Extreme? Extreme? Dr. King's literally standing there, mouth shut, hands tied behind his back, doing nothing.
So just being there is extreme. It sounds like the preacher has a problem with the king even existing.
At first, I was rather disappointed that the fellow pastor would see my nonviolent efforts as those of extremeness. I started thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need not to follow the do-nothingism of the complacent or the hatred and despair of the black nationalists. There is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this decision had not been made, I am convinced that by now, many streets of the South would be flowing with floods of blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers treat us like troublemakers, refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes out of frustration and despair will turn to black nationalist ideas, a development that will lead to a racial nightmare. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The need of freedom will eventually come. This is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded us of our birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded us that we can gain it. We are moving with a sense of urgency toward the promised land and the racial justice. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and frustrations. He has to get them out. So let him march sometime. Let him have his prayer marches to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these nonviolent ways, they will come out in expressions of violence. This is not a threat. It is a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your frustration. But I have tried to say that this normal and healthy frustration can be channeled through the creative outlet of nonviolent protests. I had hoped that the white Christian would understand this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much.
Dang, Dr. King ain't playing right now.
It's the truth. What he's saying makes sense.
And he's so bold with it, too. I mean, whatever they want to hear or not, he's still saying it.
Well, it needs to be said.
I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too small in number, but they are big in quality. Some like Ralph McGill, Lillian Smith, Harry Golden, and James Dabbs have written about our struggle in equivalent and prophetic and understanding terms. Others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South. They sat in with us at lunch counters and rode in with us on the freedom rides. They were with us in filthy roach-infested jails, suffering the abuse of brutally and angry policemen who see them as dirty Negro lovers. Wow. I had the strange feeling when I was placed in the leadership of the bus protest in Montgomery several years ago that we would have the support of the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be some of our strongest allies. Instead, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the security of stained glass windows. In spite of my shattering dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern serve as the channel through which our just concerns could get to the people in power. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. In the midst of blatant injustice, I've heard so many ministers say, those are social issues, which the gospel has nothing to do with.
There was a time when the church was very powerful. It was during that period that the early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was the thermostat that changed the rules of society. Wherever the early Christians entered a town, the people in power got disturbed and rushed to convict them for being troublemakers. But they accepted that they had to obey God rather than man. They were small in number, but big in commitment. They were too God-intoxicated to be intimidated. Things are different now. The modern church is so often a weak voice with an uncertain sound.
It is so often the main supporter of the way things are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will cancel its realness, lose the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I meet young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this important hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, we will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over this nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America.
Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson scratched across the pages of history the majestic word of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our foreparents labored here without wages. They made Cotton King, and they built the homes of their masters in the midst of brutal injustice and shameful humiliation. And yes, out of the bottomless vitality, our people continue to thrive and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery cannot stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands.
I must close now, but before closing, I am led to bring up one other point in your statement that troubled me.
The Birmingham police are to be warmly commended for keeping order and preventing violence.
I don't believe you would have so warmly commended the policemen if you had seen its angry, violent dogs, literally biting armed, non-violent Negroes. I don't believe you would have so quickly commended the policemen if you would observe them their ugly, inhumane treatment of Negroes here in the city jail. If you would watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls. If you would see them slap and kick old Negro men and young Negro boys. If you would observe them, as they did on 2 occasions, refusing to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together. I am sorry that I cannot join you in your praise for the police department.
It is true. They have been organized in their public handling of the protesters. In this sense, they have been publicly nonviolent. But for what? To preserve evil system of segregation? So, I have tried to make it clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to gain moral ends. But now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or even more, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. I wish you had commended the Negro protester of Birmingham for their shining courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of the most inhuman bullying.
One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, courageously and with a majestic sense of purpose, facing jeering and hostile mobs, and the agonizing loneliness with a majestic sense of purpose. And the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, civilized, and a 72-year-old woman of Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride the segregated buses, and responded to one who inquired about her tiredness with ungrammatical profundity. My feet is tired, but my soul is rested. They will be young high school and college students, young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders, courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day, the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream in the most sacred values of our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that is much too long to take your precious time.
You know, I like him, but it was a bit long.
He's a preacher. What did you expect?
I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the boredom of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have ever downplayed the seriousness of this issue or seemed too impatient, please forgive me. If I have exaggerated or am tempted to settle for anything less than full brotherhood, only God can forgive me. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
I have a question for everyone listening. Do you still believe that we're the future and we have a chance?
This is a moment, an opportunity to plant the seed and water it, to watch it grow. You'll see. Do it for me. Do what you can. Do more than think or talk about it while you have the chance. Do it for love. Do it for peace. Do it for the children, for destiny. Do it for me. With your help, with your help, we can get what we need. With your help, we can have a space and place for us to be great, that we can call our own. Call our own. Do it for me. Do what you can. Do more than think or talk about it while you have a chance. Do it for love. Do it for peace. Do it for the children, for destiny. Do it for sing the children. Do what you got. Do all talk about it while you have a chance. Do it for love. Do it for me. Do it for me. Do it for me. Do it for the children, for destiny. Do it for love, love, peace. Do it for the children, for destiny. I'm ready to grow. I'm ready to be the best that I could ever be. Do it for me. Do it for me.
Listen, thank you all so much. This has been an incredible journey that we got to be on in celebrating Dr. King's birthday in 2022. I can tell you that when we started this journey, I didn't know that it would fill me up the way that it has. And that is number one, because this script, this letter actually meant something to the children who portrayed it or who shared his letter tonight. Could you tell? Awesome, awesome. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for celebrating Dr. King's birthday, and more importantly, his dream, which he believed was God-given. And so the only way that we know that change can happen is by love. And God is love. And the prayer from our heart for you is that you would allow God to love through you to bring about the change that we need to see in the earth. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for supporting art in our community. And thank you for supporting these brilliant children. Absolutely. I would like to personally call out, this is our last show, you guys. I want to call out personally our sound and our television guy, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thomas, thank you for being here. And you guys, I got to pull my co-director up here. Come on, Miss Erin. Yes. Woo, 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 woo. Listen, I could not have asked for a better co-laborer. When she and I had the opportunity to sit down and rewrite the script so that it could fit the lives of the people that would be reading it, it was a labor of love for real. We truly enjoyed that process. And guys, I have to celebrate this relationship that God has blessed me with that I didn't know that I needed for my whole life. And that is the husband and wife team. This power duo is Tom and Sarah Arthur. Thank you all so much. My love for you guys runs so deep that you would even put this in my hand and believe that it can be done. So thank you for your support. It has meant everything to me to have that type of support and brilliance behind something like this. So we love you guys. Thank you all again. The children, the cast will be outside. They'll be ready to fist bump or air hug or high five, whatever you're comfortable with. They'll be ready to receive it from you, okay? Thank you again. God bless and good night.